Well, anyway, thank you very much for coming today, because it's a nice sunny day outside. Yeah. We're all wasting that. But no, I'm very strongly in support of any groups meeting again after all the COVID business, because so many people stopped. Well, we had to stop meeting in groups, but when we were all allowed to start again, so many people stopped going. And the Natural History Society here was one of many small groups which suffered from that, because there were just too few people to support it, and that's a shame. So whenever groups like this and RSPB groups and others meet in the flesh, as it were, in person, I'm very happy to support it. And I was asked to give a talk today about hedgehogs for half an hour, and I thought, well, I know now, I talk for a lot more than that. But so what am I going to say about hedgehogs in just half an hour? So I'll start by saying I've written 2 books. There we are. That's a good thing, but there you are, which I just happen to have with me. And basically, I've been sort of Mr. Hedgehog for a very long time. I did the first ever PhD entirely on hedgehogs, finished it in 1969. And so I've been involved with all the sort of hedgehog goings on ever since. And yes, I can talk about all sorts of aspects about hedgehogs in gardens and all the rest, but what I wanted to do today was just to talk about what we've been hearing about hedgehogs, which is they're changing, they're in decline. So when I started my PhD, 1960s, the first half of the 20th century, the hedgehog was described as widespread and common. And all the books said that, way back into the 1850s, widespread and common and widespread. But more recently, we've had newspaper stories and stuff on the internet to do with the fact that the hedgehogs are in decline. And so here's a couple of examples of evidence, if you like. On the left there is information from the Game Conservancy, who've collected data on ground vermin. They put out traps to catch stoats, weasels, rats, and they pick up hedgehogs. And so you can see the number there. You don't have to be a statistician. You can see the number of hedgehogs being caught in a 50-year period has halved. Could be that gamekeepers are getting lazy, but no, it's real. There was a couple of other surveys that have been done about animals in gardens and so on, and also animals run over on the road. And those funny wonky lines there, however you interpret them, they're going down. And so there's evidence from different directions that hedgehogs now are not common as they were, not so common as they were, even if they're still reasonably widespread. And so, that's the story we're getting, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. So the question is, what's going on? And the most obvious cause of loss of hedgehogs is they get run over. But we don't know how many get run over. There's quite a lot of discussion about this. Some people suggest it's 1 million a year, which is not possible. But I know how that figure came about. What you do is you sort of count numbers of hedgehogs on a certain number of miles and multiply that by miles of road. Well, okay, fine, but it's a very crude way of estimating numbers. So, like I say, we don't know how many, but it's certainly 10,000 plus being killed each year for something that doesn't breed very rapidly. But the thing is that we know this because we see the dead hedgehogs, and their skins, particularly in dry weather, persist for 3 or 4 weeks on the road. So you might have lots of people seeing the same hedgehog and thinking we've got lots of reports of dead ones. And so, it's not a very reliable way of looking at things. But we do get lots of them killed. We also get quite a lot, probably, incinerated on Guy Fawkes Night, and also in garden bonfires. So people rake up leaves and so on in the autumn and then set light to them at some stage. And it's those leaf piles, and particularly where there are loose leaves underneath bushes, underneath garden sheds, something like that, that's exactly the place where hedgehogs build their winter nests. And they need those for hibernation, protection during hibernation, and they hibernate for about half their life, nearly 5 or 6 months each winter. And the nest is a really important structure for them, and we burn it. And if you burn your hedgehogs, I'm afraid you finish up with a few less than there were before. We also must lose hedgehogs to big mowing machines. It's necessary to mow the grass beside roads to maintain visibility for traffic and so on. But those big machines like that just would mangle hedgehogs and we'd never know. You'd never find the bits. And anyway, I don't think anyone bothers to go looking. But the fact is that our radio tracking studies show that during the summertime, that's exactly the sort of place where hedgehogs build their summer nests, in long grass and under shrubs and things, exactly the sort of place which those big mowers go and mow in great quantity. And in the gardens, people use streamers like that. The problem for hedgehogs only in the last 30 years or so, but these things with the whirly cord, you push them into the bushes, exactly the long vegetation, exactly the places where hedgehogs lie up during the summertime. And animal hospitals these days find that the hedgehog is the most common wild mammal brought into animal rescue centres, and the most common sort of injury comes from streamers. And so, these are added problems for a hedgehog that's been around for 20 million years. And, they're a long-established species, but these are modern threats to them, which they can't really adapt to. Hedgehogs can swim quite well. I've got a record of one swimming across the Thames at Henley. That's quite wide there. But the problem is that if they fall into a garden pond, they can't get out, especially these ponds which you've got a smooth fiberglass lining and a bit of a lip around the top. And so they'll fall in, they'll swim, and they'll just keep swimming until they get tired and drown. And that's accounting for some more hedgehogs. A shame, because it could be avoided by building a little ramp. That's a National Trust ramp, that one. And you only need a piece of chicken wire or something hanging over the edge so that the animals can climb out. But without those kind of aids, our garden ponds are yet another threat to hedgehogs that we don't really realise that is a problem until you find the dead hedgehog in it. There's a big problem with badgers too, and I like badgers, but the difficulty is that they do eat hedgehogs. They're one of the few things that are powerful enough and with long enough claws to pull open a rolled up hedgehog. So badgers eat hedgehogs. More particularly, perhaps, they eat the same sort of food. Things like earthworms, for example, and leather jackets, beetles and so on. And since a badger is about this big as five hedgehogs, it's going to eat the equivalent of 5 hedgehogs. So every extra badger we've got is eating the food that is not any longer available for the hedgehogs. And so the increase in numbers of badgers, however big it is, and a lot of argument about that, but the recent increase in numbers of badgers is a problem for hedgehogs because of predation and because of feeding on the same food. And the prediction was made some years ago now that once the badgers get to be beyond a certain level of abundance, the hedgehogs are likely to die out. And that seems to be borne out by some of the data, again, from some time ago, 1990s, long enough ago now. You can imagine, but the process has continued since then. That threshold level of badger abundance was reached, as you can see there, in 4 major areas of the country, regions of the country, 1990, 30 years ago. And since then, badger numbers have continued to increase. And so whatever the level of impact badgers have on hedgehogs, and one can argue about that, there is still a problem, and the problem is getting bigger as we have more and more badgers. But I think there's another big issue as well, and that is that sometime in the beginning of the 20th century, we began to modernise and industrialise our farming practices. And in particular, during the late 1950s, early 1960s, there was a big move to remove hedgerows from the landscape, enlarge the fields, make it possible to use bigger machines and therefore farm more efficiently. And so in some parts of the country, we get arable farming, which occupies not just square little patches, but great big patches, square mile fields. And out there's nowhere for hedgehogs to nest, winter or summer, and the ground is treated with all sorts of chemicals to eradicate the very things that hedgehogs need to eat. And so if you actually imagine the way that we've enlarged arable farming, that is effectively squeezed the hedgehogs out of very large areas at the landscape level, forcing the hedgehogs to live in the hedgerows, and that's all they can find to survive in, basically. And so there's also what we do in our gardens, because we like to look after our flowers and we like to grow vegetables in the allotments and all that. And so there's a worry that maybe we're killing things that we didn't mean to, and that's particularly been focused in the past on slug pellets. So we did some experiments a few years ago to see what happens about this, because basically if you kill a slug, it's got the poison in it, and maybe if a hedgehog comes along and eats a dead slug, it'll kill itself. So we poisoned a load of slugs, and people were quite pleased about that, and then had them analysed. And the good news is that slug pellets decompose very rapidly inside slugs, and so the slugs themselves are harmless. The pellets are not, and so that's why there's been an ongoing pressure to control the use of slug pellets, and the principal ones are now no longer available to be used. They've supposedly been withdrawn from the market. But if you must use carbon chemicals, slug pellets or anything else, do think about it and use them carefully. Because when you think about it carefully, you realise that if you're spraying something like this onto the roses, you're not harming the hedgehogs, they live on the ground. But of course, when it rains, whatever it is you've sprayed on the roses finishes up on the ground, where it may affect earthworms, hedgehogs, robins, almost anything. So, be careful about using any kind of poisons in the garden. Once you put poisons out there, you don't know when they're going to finish up. And we'll see some more of that in the story of rat poisons, because this is one of my little hobby horses at the moment. People don't like rats and mice, fair enough. But what you've seen, all of us have seen, are these sort of little canisters everywhere. I can imagine you put them around hospitals, because if you've got rats in hospitals, that'd be really bad news. Our local supermarket has got quite a lot of those, and the best way to stop rats being found around there would be to tidy up their own dustbins, which they don't do. Nevertheless, you see lots of these things, not because there is a rat problem or a mouse problem, but because there might be. And so, okay, we put out poisons here. Oh, it's all right, don't worry. The dogs can't get at it. They're inside that canister. Hedgehogs can't get in there. The hole's too small. Fine, but the poisons that are used for killing rodents are not quick-acting things that knock them down stone dead straight away. The way they really work is to work slowly, and the animal doesn't know it's dying. So it eats the bait in there and goes out and dies somewhere else. Nobody knows where. But you've got these animals lying around dead somewhere, and they'll be picked up by scavengers, quite obviously. And we've now found evidence of some hedgehogs containing 3 different kinds of rat poison. And 3 different kinds. That means that they didn't just intercept rat poison once, but they did so on at least 3 different occasions with different poisons, even though we're not trying to kill rats. So I gather that now they've discovered residues of rodenticides in American school children. And so school kids don't go around eating dead rats. But this stuff is actually really, really persistent. And like I say, once you put it out there, you don't know where it's gone, where it's going to finish up. And so I'm really kind of very worried about this. And I'm told that, don't worry, we're tightening up the rules. Well, they did tighten up the rules. A couple of years ago, you're not supposed to be able to buy these unless you've been trained and got a licence. Well, OK, fine. Your training and your licence makes no difference. The dead rat is still a risk to wildlife. These poisons are turning up now in barn owls and in red kites, quite a lot in them, buzzards. I think the figure was something like 60% of dead red kites have got rat poisons in them. So, you know, it is actually an ongoing problem, and I think this is probably another modern contribution to the hedgehog's tale of woe. And so this really leads me to my punchline, if you like, which is that I think the big problem is that people don't think, they don't realise how complicated the world is and how much more complicated it has become with the modern chemicals that are available to all of us. And this is a shame, because we don't really know what we're doing, and that's important, because if we don't know what we're doing with our environment, we don't know how it's going to affect ourselves. And so, yes, rat poisons turn up in people. That's sort of slightly worrying. And if you get hedgehogs dying out, you know, does it matter? They've been around 20 million years, longer than mammoths and woolly saber-toothed tigers and things. So if they're dying out, well, they've had a good shot, they've had time. Does it matter? And it does matter, really, because they're not only just cuddly things, popular animals and our only spiny mammal, but they're also a really good bioindicator. They feed on worms and insect larvae and so on, which are very valuable food for other things as well, like starlings and song thrushes, who are also in decline. Well, fancy that. And so if you've got your hedgehogs as a surviving and viable population, then you could say, that's an indication that all's well with that environment. If your hedgehogs are dying out, you need to know why, because it could easily be that a load of other things are going as well. So look after your hedgehogs, and the birds will look after themselves. It's a good kind of message. But people need to think about what we're doing with these things. Weed killers, you know, what's wrong with weed killers? We're killing weeds, not hedgehogs. Aha, okay. But paraquat, now withdrawn from the market, did kill mammals. And you can imagine you go around spraying this stuff, and hedgehogs or anything else really, rabbits or robins hopping about in the grass, get it on their fur, groom themselves, that's it. And it's a problem. So you're using something to kill weeds, but actually you don't know what else you're killing. And that's why we need to think carefully about what we're doing. And that particularly applies now. Paraquat, as I say, has been withdrawn from the market because it is so pervasive and dangerous. But we've now got the problem with various sorts of insecticides. You'll be aware of the problems with things like DDT in the 1960s and so on. They're very persistent things, and they've been withdrawn from the market to stop the problem. So what happens? You take out one kind of chemical because after 20 years they discover it's a bad news. So industry wants to carry on with its business, farmers want to carry on with their business, you simply invent a new kind of pesticide. And so what we now have are these things called neonicotinoids, which are actually very much more powerful. They'll be effective at much lower doses than the kind of pesticides we've had before. And you've probably read about this in the newspapers, hear about it on television, because people worry that these insecticides are inadvertently, if you like, killing off bumblebees. And bumblebees are important for pollination and keeping things going. Fine. What people don't worry about is that these same chemicals seem to be very harmful for earthworms. And ecologically speaking, earthworms are just as important as bumblebees. And so, and they're also hedgehog food. And so we've got a problem here with these very powerful insecticides. And last week's news, I think it was that the big sugar beet growers up in East Anglia wanted to make temporary use of one of these substances because of a particular problem this season. and the government has said no. So at least somebody's actually paying attention to just how dangerous this stuff is. But maybe some of you have been using turf enhancements. You see lots of advertisements for it, making beautiful green lawns and nice tennis court, nice cricket grounds, all that kind of thing. Turf enhancements, these are substances which are put in the ground to control the grubs that eat the roots and mess up your lawn. So let's have some grub control. Those grubs are the larvae of the larger beetles, particularly that hedgehogs, song thrushes, and all the rest count among their diet. And so once again, we're trying to improve our lawn, which is actually a rather trivial kind of aim, really. And what we're doing is who knows what. So I think one of the problems the hedgehog faces is people don't understand, and that's why I'm saying all this. So one other thing to bear in mind also is that the question of our own expansion, if you like. We're apparently going to have 1 million new houses built every year, not quite sure where. But the more that we fill in open space with houses, and people have got to live somewhere, fair enough, yes, the more you find that space-hungry animals will be squeezed out. And so how much space do hedgehogs need? Well, one hedgehog can live in a garden, but one hedgehog's no good, is it? It's not a population. You need actually a viable population. And you can put some information in your computer and it'll come up with the answer that you need 32 hedgehogs to be reasonably sure that the hedgehogs will still be there in 100 years' time. That's what computers do for you. 32 hedgehogs, how much land do they need? Put that information into a computer and it'll come up with the answer, which might be wildly out. I don't know, but anyway, it makes the point that we have a way of suggesting that the minimum area a viable population of hedgehogs needs is around about 90 hectares. That's 200 acres. That's a pretty big patch, isn't it? If you get 200 acres in an urban area, that's a prime place for building a new batch of houses. This is a golf course over near Staines, where we've studied hedgehogs. And you can see it's too small. That's the 90 hectare circle. And I think the hedgehogs did survive there. I don't know if they're still there, because the people in the gardens all around here put out food for them. So you've actually helped to boost the population there. Okay, maybe I should go back and see if the hedgehogs have managed to survive on that kind of support. But clearly, it's a bit marginal. Here's the last remaining population in London of hedgehogs in Regent's Park. And you can see, again, that's bigger than the circle. So it's big. Regent's Park is theoretically big enough to support hedgehogs. But when you get there, you find the radio tracking studies have shown that the biggest area of apparent foraging is, in fact, the football pitches. And the hedgehogs don't go there. I'm told they've not been putting out pesticides there, but and that's probably true. But when you think about a footballer running around, he weighs 10 or 12 stone or whatever, and all his weight is hitting the ground on little studs about this big, each one is square centimetre. So that's going to be compressing the ground. Well, if he does that once a week, it doesn't matter. But if the football pitches are used, 2 or 3 times a day, 5 days a week, that is actually going to be compacting the soil, and particularly with clay soils, it may be actually you can't have much in the way of worms and other stuff living there. So again, we need to think about what's going on here, and certainly the expansion of building, with or without gardens, is not going to help hedgehogs. They need quite a lot of space. So what can we do with our gardens? Our gardens are generally a bit small. Mine's less than 90 hectares. I expect yours is as well. And of course, many of our modern gardens are fenced in like this. Nothing can get through these fences. They're keeping everything out, including the frogs that might otherwise be breeding in your pond. So we've been running a campaign to get people to make a little hole in the fence with a special label here, calling it a hedgehog highway. And by linking up gardens, each garden being too small to support a viable population of hedgehogs, but if you link up enough of them, then maybe we can enable the hedgehog population to survive, at least locally. And people don't like making holes in the fence because you let dogs and cats and things come through. So here you can see a concrete block, put the other side, which turns the hole into a little tunnel. And cats have difficulty getting through tunnels because they've got longer legs than hedgehogs. And if they do manage to get through a hole that size, you just put another concrete block and make it a bit longer. Hedgehogs can get through very, very easily. And so this seems to be working reasonably well. We've got, I forget how many tens of thousands of hedgehog highways have been made in holes in people's fences all around the country. And this is all being pursued, what should we say, encouraged by Hedgehog Street, which is a kind of cooperative action, if you like, by the People's Trust for Endangered Species, linked with the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. Got its own Hedgehog Street website, loads of ideas about how to look after and encourage your hedgehogs. So look it up sometime. So there you are, there's my hedgehog tunnel. And so I suppose this is my message. Just let's be aware of what's going on. Use the hedgehog to remind us of what a complicated world we live in, and have a look at some of these websites which might provide you with some more information and ideas. Think hedgehog.
Is that your photograph, Pat? Is that your photograph?
Seems to be.
I mean, did you take that?
Of course I did.
I'm trying to impress upon the audience that you are an excellent photographer.
I don't believe in using other people's pictures.
No.
And so, yeah. And it made me some money as well, and the flower pot didn't cost anything.
Pat, I don't mind, I'm sure you don't mind me saying this, but Pat and his lovely wife Mary back there, his photography paid for some of his long overseas holidays. He's done a lot of research abroad, and his photography has helped to, beyond his skill of course, other skill in his subject, but photography is one of his subjects which has well, helped him to become what he is. So
It's been my hobby and paid for itself, yeah.
Good.
Is this a European-wide problem?
Yes. Well, it's more of a problem in some places than others, but where people have been paying attention to hedgehogs, particularly in places like the Netherlands and Germany, they're coming up with the same sort of problems, that numbers appear to be declining. People are saying, I haven't seen one recently, people are saying they're not as common as they were. The story I'm telling you here is what they've got over there, watered down if you like, though in the Netherlands I think it's getting to be quite serious.
The thing is, we know what you've told us, but most of the population doesn't.
We need to get a good book, don't they?
And they're not really interested anyway, a lot of people.
A lot of people are not, that's right, and are actually focused on other things. You know, they see the countryside as somewhere for running marathons, for example, and or rushing about on a bike, yeah. And I think it's mentally bankrupt, but I think it's rather sad in a way. But it's something we have to contend with. I mean, people are really interested. There are more people go to football matches than do almost anything else. I mean, when you think about it, and that's great as far as I'm concerned, because it keeps them out of the countryside. But it means they're not focused in the way that some of the rest of us are. So yeah, it's a difficult thing. Yeah.
I hadn't realised football studs over the years and that would have such an impact.
Well, there you are. See, think hedgehog.
Yeah.
Compacted ground, something terrible.
Yeah.
That's why the pitches have to be aerated every season, if not more than once.
That's right. I actually wanted to put some sampling into the Regent's Park, make sort of pots out sampling for earthworms and beetles and that, the way you would in any other grassland. But I was told the footballers wouldn't like it because they'd fall over. So, okay.
You using AstroTurf a lot on major football pitches now as well, aren't they?
Well, that's right. Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
doesn't do any favours to the hedgehog, or any wildlife really.
Yeah.
No.
I haven't seen one for a long time.
In fact, I'm just thinking, which one of the big London parks, it might be Hyde Park. Yeah, I think it was Hyde Park. They had sort of one of these grand musical festivals or something or other, and I took some photos afterwards, and there were some gulls there and some crows just sitting on the ground. They weren't even bothering to try and feed. I mean, and but I was told not to worry because they strip all the turf off and replace it. They were actually replacing the turf by bringing it in from the north of England somewhere.
Pat, are you worry about the people demonising badgers and suggesting that the decline of hedgehogs is all down to badgers? And there's an opportunity at the moment with the government still allowing massive badger culls to have parts of the country with no badgers.
Hmm.
So maybe someone should be studying what's happening to hedgehogs in those areas.
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be demonising badgers for causing the decline. The decline is caused by a load of other things as well. It's just the badgers are not helping and probably making it a good deal worse in some places. But yes, they've been culling badgers because badgers transmit bovine TB, and the idea is that we should be studying where the badgers are removed to see if it benefits the hedgehogs. At least that would be a sort of bit of silver lining to the cloud, if you like. And there has been some work on this, and unfortunately, it was the results they got were statistically not significant because there was too much variation. I think the reason for that was because what they did was to take out the badgers, but then did that study of hedgehogs only 2 years later or something, which isn't long enough really for hedgehogs to build up their population again. So I'm hoping that study might actually be done again on some of these badger cull areas. I suggested one time that they should try doing some roadkill surveys before they killed the badgers and look afterwards. And I was told, no, we can't do that, because if you tell anybody where they're going to be killing badgers, all the badger lovers will be out there, you see. And so there are all sorts of problems with this. But as I say, there is some tentative evidence that where badgers have been culled, not necessarily eliminated, but where their numbers have been reduced, other things, hedgehogs, have benefited. I'm not saying that's the way we should conserve hedgehogs, go out and kill badgers.
No, badgers and hedgehogs have lived together for millennia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And why is it suddenly
Yes.
people, blaming badgers?
Yes.
That's
The answer to that, of course, we'll never know. But if you go back and look at in the old days, the first Queen Elizabeth passed some legislation which actually empowered church wardens to pay out money for killing vermin. Okay, so if you were a farm worker or sort of country peasant or something, you could get some beer money out of the church warden by going to kill vermin. Hedgehogs are one thing, you get threepence or something for a hedgehog, and polecats, get polecats. Badgers were quite a lot. You got sort of 10 shillings or something for killing a badger. And so that was quite an incentive. That's a week's wages for going to kill a badger. Yet the number of badgers recorded as having been killed, the amount of money paid out for killing badgers in the 18th century is nothing compared with what was paid for hedgehogs. And so I interpret that as meaning that badgers were actually quite rare in the past. And indeed, if you look at if you read some of the books from sort of the early 20th century, it doesn't tell you that you're overrun with badgers. They're relatively scarce, rarely seen in this part. The story was right up until the 1970s that badgers were scarce or even absent from most of East Anglia. Well, that's not the case now. And so, for whatever reason, and there's interesting debate about that, for whatever reason, badger numbers have enormously increased. By how much is hard to say, but the first National Badger Survey calculated how many badgers there were. there was a kind of repeat survey about 20 years later, and there were more badgers in a 20-year period. How many more is what, again, people argue about the methodology and so on, but there were more. And so at the present time, if we believe the total estimates, the total tonnage of badgers walking about our countryside exceeds the total tonnage of all our other native carnivores put together.
I've got a video set up in the garden. We've had it there about 10, 15 years. We get badgers, hedgehogs, foxes, and they all get along famously. They all eat together. There's no fighting, no scrubbling. I mean, why do we have a go at one animal and not
How much
another?
food do you put out?
How much food?
Yeah.
Just enough. But, oh yeah, the lawn is covered in peanuts, so they
Yeah,
do
yeah.
like peanuts.
Yeah.
But as I'm saying, the hedgehog's in the middle of badgers.
Yes.
The foxes come in, the badgers chase the foxes,
Yes.
and vice versa.
Yes.
They all have a lot of fun.
Yes.
But then I talk to people in the same street.
Yes.
I haven't seen a hedgehog for years.
Yes.
Well, you don't have a camera, so
Yeah.
you won't. You know, they come out when you're in bed, for God's sake.
And your food is good as well.
And our food is good. Costs me a lot of money.
Well, okay. And other people have told me the same sort of thing. And for a bit, it may well work, you know.
Well, it's
But once-
worked for 15 years. That's not
15 years is not so long, really.
Well, it-
But anyway, if I can offer you an alternative to this. It's just that one of our surveys where we were monitoring rehabilitated hedgehogs who'd been in hospital and released. We had about a dozen hedgehogs there which were being radio tracked, and within the 6-week period that we were tracking them, a third of those were killed by badgers. And in one case, my assistant who was doing the radio tracking saw it happen. And so, you know, okay, that's only one sample, but there are plenty of stories that go back into the old nature books, the ages, of people finding opened hedgehog skins. And
but if the hedgehog's died, the badger will come in and
of
get
course,
it and sell it.
of course.
But if it's alive, he's not going to try and get a porcupine in his mouth.
Unfortunately, I've seen video of a badger pulling a live hedgehog apart.
Yeah.
Sorry, one understands that, pulling it apart, but
Yeah.
then what happens to the guard hairs of the hedgehog? Does that get digested in as well? Because if you don't see those lying around.
The hedgehog's got spines and no fur on its back, just spines, and the long hairs of the belly, which is a bit sparse,
Yeah.
and the sort of a fringe around where it joins. And when these open skins are found, they're usually ripped open like that.
Right.
They're not ripped open at the back. The point about badgers is their claws are long enough to get through the spines, and their forelimbs, because they use them for digging, are strong enough to pull a hedgehog apart. And once he gets his teeth in there, of course, you can just shake it around. But the badgers have got a big advantage over foxes, for example, because they've got longer claws. But foxes are also a problem, and again, this is stuff that people have actually been collecting data on. The fox's problem is that the fox sometimes grabs the hedgehog by the hind leg, and quite a lot of animal hospitals have been reporting hedgehogs with damaged hind legs. I think there might be dogs as well, but the thing is that the nestlings, the hedgehog nestlings, are very vulnerable to badgers, foxes, and anything else that comes across them. And that was the story I was told about a place up in East London where the foxes have been taking out baby hedgehogs. Just stories, I'm
What's
afraid.
changed in
But
a million years? I mean, they've been getting along for a million years or so, and now we have a problem.
that's right, and that's the point that Bernard was making. They've lived together all this time, and so why is it a problem? And the problem is that I think badgers particularly are now much more numerous than they ever were before. And their numbers have gone up, and we've got plenty of data to show that during the late 20th century, and the numbers are probably still rising. The question is why. No one really knows why, but there are more badgers. You know, when I first used to drive around, if I saw a dead badger, I'd stop and pick it up off the road, could have a look at it and maybe make a skin or a skull or something. Now I don't even bother to write them down. And I've done lots of, when I was doing field work in Somerset, I did lots and lots of transects across to Somerset, and I would quite frequently see more dead badgers and dead hedgehogs dead on the road. And that's not because I'm driving too fast to notice hedgehogs. I mean, you know, I'm sorry, but there are load more badgers around.
Yeah, there's traffic, yeah.
In the early 80s, I had a dog and I used to walk it at 6:30 in the morning, and I'd go into the park, which is opposite Trinity Park Hospital. And one morning I went in and there were 4 or 5 little young hedgehogs lying around with their heads all chewed off.
Mm.
And I've
Something
never
had
forgot
found them
that
in the
sight,
nest,
and I
probably.
guess that was badgers, because I believe they used to live at the back of what was Marconi and Seaman.
Maybe badgers, but again, might be foxes, might be dogs even, you know. But yes.
Yeah, just the bodies were there
problem.
still. Sad.
Well, sorry, I think we better call this fascinating discussion Think Hedgehogs.
I think lunch, actually. My wife was saying, I think lunch.
Phil, don't forget, get Pat to promote his book there before he takes it.
Yeah,
Got to use the opportunity now.
yes, I'm sure people will.
It's his fault.
want to buy
It's his
that.
fault.
And thanks for asking all your questions. I mean, it's been amazing talk. Think Hedgehog, well, my mind is now completely overwhelmed with thoughts about hedgehogs, and well, basically the hope that they'll survive and grow in numbers.
Yeah, we usually have our
So
lunch at
thanks for that talk, that was really good.
When I
Quite amazing amount of information. Before anyone goes, we've got the talk for next week, which is seasonal, spring. Christopher Everett has done a talk once before on this, but he's going to change it rather and make it more general. So that's next week. Then you've got a whole list of these up until the 10th of April. We've got one space there, haven't we, Mike? And then we go on and we're doing very well. So thanks for suggesting speakers, and thanks for coming and asking all your questions. It's been a fascinating day, so thanks very much for coming.
Thanks for coming.
You're very good, obviously deep in the knowledge.